countries that are more advanced economically, but the impacts on social fabric, on the economy, security, and democracy definitely felt much stronger in countries that were involved in cultivation and transit. I should mention we're not really dividing the countries, though, into strict definitions of consuming, transit, and cultivation countries, because really the issue has become much more integrated over the years. So this also suggests the need for differentiated approaches, because really the impacts are different from cultivation to consumption. The violence definitely more concentrated in the production and transit phases, but again, a lot of differentiated impacts, even including the types of drugs. The health impacts much more from certain substances than others, and an important stress on the impact on vulnerable groups. The drug security relationship we looked at very carefully, and we did know there's a tremendous amount of variety in terms of impacts. Organized crime, a major concern in many countries. We noted a lot of diversification of organized crime beyond simply the drug industry. But we also noted that in countries of final consumption, generally speaking, violence was less of an issue. Then in terms of conclusions on the violence issue, we really drew back to issues of institutional strength, strength of law enforcement and judicial structures in individual countries. In some cases, we had countries side by side that had the same flows coming through, and certain countries were able to deal with those problems better than others because of institutional capabilities they have been able to deliver. So really the question of state institutions, their effectiveness in delivering services, their effectiveness in extending their physical presence, this was very important. Impunity and corruption, also major challenges in certain parts of the region, and the importance of rule of law. Moving out to the health side, the message on public health is very, very similar to the message that's incorporated in our hemispheric drug strategy, and in the messages I think that we've been hearing here over the last couple of days. We need to treat drug dependency as a chronic recurring illness. We need a health-oriented approach. We need a wide range of interventions. But we do have limited resources, and we do come down fairly hard on the point that many of the countries in our region have not yet picked up the challenge of adopting this public health approach to their drug problems. Connected with the public health approach, we do raise the issue of criminalization of personal use and alternatives to incarceration. And we make that point several times in the paper, that it is hard to imagine a focus on health, a strong focus on health, on drug dependency as a health issue, juxtaposing with criminalization of drug possession or of crimes associated with drug possession. Finally, we suggest that we need a flexible approach that captures the very different realities. We need to develop more analysis, we need to develop more evidence, we need to do more evaluation, but we still need to maintain our unity within that diversity, and we need to maintain collective action. So we have to somehow strike that balance. We don't say exactly how that balance should be struck, but we think it's important. So those are the conclusions of the analytical report. The scenarios took various drafts of the analytical report as their input. They also relied on some interviews, about 75 in-depth interviews that our consultants conducted. And then they had their own methodology. I think we have a number of the scenario team participants here, so maybe they can describe the process better than I can. I was sort of on the side. But it was very interesting. It was a multi-stakeholder exercise. Drew individuals from the business sector, health, education. We had quite a few law enforcement people, current and retired police chiefs. We had members of civil society, and we also had some active as well as some retired government officials. Most from the Americas, but we did have 3 participants from Europe in the group as well. And we had a set of consultants who had worked on this scenario methodology, which actually was originally developed by Shell Oil Company, and several of the people were Shell alumni. And so we had 2 seminars in Panama to launch the effort, and the notion was to put together stories about the future that have to meet these 4 criteria: relevant, challenging, plausible, and clear. Now those sound rather simple, but I think we started off, I don't know, John, how many scenarios? We had about 100 scenarios, and we got down to 4, so most of them were thrown out, not meeting one or another of these criteria. So they needed to meet these very hard tests. And essentially the scenario group polled among themselves as to whether the different stories met the tests. It was kind of an inductive process. And they were very harsh on each other. So at the end, we had 4 scenarios. However, they were not supposed to be forecasts, and they were not supposed to reflect personal biases about what ought to happen in the future. And this was difficult because I think everyone comes into this issue with a set of biases, preconditions, thoughts about the way the future should look. But you were supposed to park those biases at the door before you went in to the scenario process. That was the idea. Hopefully we accomplished that. Also, the scenarios are not mutually exclusive. So, in fact, when we've talked to a lot of the countries subsequently, we've made this presentation at a couple of our commission meetings. Many of the reactions have been, well, you know, we like this piece of this scenario, we like that piece of that scenario, we have to kind of merge them together, and that's certainly an option. So I'll say a few words about the 4 scenarios that were actually put together. I have so many of the scenario team members here that I know they're going to object to the way I present these scenarios, but at any rate, be patient with me and save your corrections till later. So the first scenario, which is called Together, had a definition of the drug problem as basically an insecurity problem with a very heavy focus on weak state institutions, especially state institutions of law enforcement and justice. So the response was to work internationally as well as regionally to bolster these state institutions, to put a lot more effort, financing, political will into strengthening those institutions. If you could pull that off, you would get better citizen security, you'd get better credibility, you'd get more partnerships. However, none of these scenarios were very rosy. All of them had downsides, and the downside to this one was, could you really pull it off? Especially in those countries in which the obstacles were so daunting in terms of really going up against organized crime to strengthen these institutional capabilities. Are you really going to get the international cooperation? You're going to get the financial cooperation from the international community to really, I think you could call it surge in strengthening your law enforcement institutions. We talked about this. Or are you just going to shift the trafficking to neighboring states that, for whatever reason, aren't so successful in bolstering their institutions? So this was definitely a very interesting, challenging scenario. It was put together with the help of a lot of law enforcement people there. And again, it has a lot of potential, but it also has difficulties. The second scenario, called Pathways, was oriented more towards the legal and regulatory regimes, with some countries wanting to explore new options, basically feeling that the current criminal-type sanction approach was not delivering the right results. There were some other countries that didn't go along with this. So there was experimentation that went on. There was some reallocation of resources. And there was some possibility of shrinking criminal markets. But at the same time, this scenario recognized some of the risks of the transition to regulated markets, questions about problematic use, tourism, institutional issues, prevention issues, and also what would happen if some countries went along with this, others didn't, intergovernmental tensions, this sort of thing, and as well as the impact on neighboring states. So again, this is a scenario in which you do have some movement in shifting the legal and regulatory regimes as a possible way to move forward with the problem. But again, it's not risk-free and it's not problem-free. The third scenario, called resilience, is really defined as a look at kind of underlying social and economic dysfunction as really the heart of the drug problem, and a recognition that central governments were not very effective at dealing with this problem, so you really needed more of a grassroots efforts to do a kind of bottom-up creation of initiatives at the community level through NGOs, through the private sector, through state and local government initiatives. So the notion would be, the citizens would take the drug problem kind of into their own hands and move ahead with local initiatives, which sounds good. If it works, I think it would be great. You'd have healthier communities, you'd have stronger communities. There was a very interesting focus on families in this scenario, which I think was very welcome. However, again, could you pull it off is the question. Is the civil society community strong enough to take this kind of challenge on in the face of organized crime? Do you have that institutional strength? Can you create it at the local community level? That is a challenge with this scenario. So all those three scenarios were considered basically, in general, more or less positive scenarios. The final scenario was one that the consensus was that we definitely wanted to avoid it at all costs. The definition of that problem in that scenario was that there were unbearable costs to countries involved, mostly in the transit zones, and that some countries might simply just give up the fight, essentially turn themselves into something bordering narco states. They would simply allow drug trafficking to take place, and there would be increased investment by the narco groups in those countries, and countries basically would to some extent lose control of their territories. Again, on the positive side, there could be some resources freed up by this strategy, but the consensus was that this was a very negative outcome. It could substantially increase tensions and was to be avoided, if at all possible, ideally by taking some other steps, some combination of the steps involved in the other three scenarios. So these were the four scenarios that were developed. I just want to highlight a few of what we saw as some of the synergies between the two reports, some of the areas that seemed to be repeated in the two reports. One was the focus on strengthening institutions. This really was felt across all the different scenarios, all three scenarios, with the exception of the fourth, focused on the importance of institutional strengthening, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be judicial, whether it be in the civil society, or even in the case of the pathway scenario, the regulatory capabilities of the state. You need to have this institutional strengthening. The health and community focus, very important in our analytical report, and very important, particularly in the resilience scenario. And the notion of a flexible, differentiated approach, to legal and regulatory changes that is evidence-based. That's certainly the basis of the chapter in the analytical report, and that is the focus of the pathway scenario. So looking ahead, when we look at the new dialogue, again, this is a repetition, but we look at heterogeneous issues, we look at the importance of differentiation, flexibility, public health, institutional strengthening. These are some of the major messages. Subsequent to the issuance of the report to the member states, which was in May of last year, we had the OAS General Assembly very effectively hosted by the government of Guatemala in Antigua, and the OAS foreign ministers issued a joint statement, the Declaration of Antigua, which to some extent provided a roadmap for the next steps as to what we should do with this issue. And a lot of it had to do with basically dissemination. So we were asked to disseminate the report and its findings in the sub-regional area. So we have the Secretary General made presentations to Central America, the so-called SICA group, as well as to the Caribbean heads of state, CARICOM. We were also asked to disseminate at the national level, and so the Secretary General, myself, and others have visited a number of countries in the hemisphere where we've disseminated the report. We also have disseminated it in Europe. We went to Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and now here at Vienna. So this is again part of the mandate. We were asked to work on the health issue, and so we went to the Pan American Health Organization, made a presentation there, and we're now working to implement an agreed work plan that we have between our commission and the Pan American Health Organization on incorporating the public health focus into the hemispheric drug issue. We also had consultations at the UN, at the General Assembly. There are a number of heads of state very interested in the report. We had consultations with public security ministers and a number of civil society outreach events, some actually here in Europe, in London, as well as in the US. And we've had several discussions with our own drug commissioners, some of whom are around the table. In fact, I apologize because they've heard this presentation 2 or 3 times. I don't know how many times you've heard this, probably too many times. But we did have the opportunity to kind of take a look at next steps. Next steps also with respect to our hemispheric drug strategy as well as the report. And so as I mentioned, the public health issue, we're working very, very hard on this. Actually, Brazil is the chair of our demand reduction experts group. I think I saw our Brazilian friends here. Yes, they're here. And we're working on a number of areas where we're looking to strengthen the public health response in the drug issue. So that work is moving ahead very well.